welcome to the very first of a series of leadership webinars. This is under the umbrella of Randstad Leader Connect. It's an exciting moment for us because it's our very first one.
I know.
And
very excited.
Yeah, you know, and pioneering something new. Really, I'd like to say it's thanks to all of you who are on this webinar today. I've met with many of you in my travels across the country. And this is an idea that came from you. So we're really pleased to bring it to life. So thank you for your suggestions, ideas, and the questions that you've submitted as well today. A brief introduction, of course, I'm Paul Dupuis, the MD and CEO of Randstad India here, Canadian by birth. I've lived here in this part of the world for almost 30 years. I was in Japan.
You're not a Canadian.
Deep inside. I mean, you know, I was in Ladakh a few weeks ago playing ice hockey, so proof that I am Canadian. I lived in Japan for 22 years. Prior to India, I was MD of Randstad in Japan, and now in India, incredible India, for about 3 years. Very pleased today to welcome our special guest, Aditya Kohli from Clix Capital, pardon me. Aditya joining us for our very first webinar here. Really appreciate it because our conversation started up north one day.
That's right.
On this idea. So Aditya has more than 2 decades of experience, of course, across HR and business and operations, capital management, technology, culture, driving innovation. So has some really interesting perspective. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. Very excited to be here. It's one of my first. I've never done a webinar before, so excited about it. We've got a very nice topic, so let's kind of get into it.
Let's do it. And out of full transparency, in fact, both Aditya and I, it's our first time to be on this side of a webinar. I think many of us in our journey, in our career, we've been part of webinars, usually as an observer. We've been on panels and so on, but first time to do a webinar. So please join us on this journey today. Again, thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about my experience in India over the past few years. You know, I travel across the country, meet leaders like you, Aditya, and many of the leaders who are on the webinar today. Whether they're heads of HR, they're CEOs, leaders in their own rights, regardless of industry, a lot of the same topics are coming up. And they're not limited to India, but certainly India being the fastest growing economy in the world, the fastest growing workforce, youngest workforce in the world, literally a land that's under construction in many ways, which I really like. And that's one of the fun things about India. But it also brings challenges. Topics around AI, automation, cloud, the rapidly changing environment and technology, and how technology is entering our lives and into the workplace. That's one topic that comes up. Certainly the topic around skilling and upskilling, reskilling, and so on. So a number of topics we'd like to address today. I think we'll start. I'll throw a few of those out to you now, and we can have a conversation.
Thanks, Paul. I think a lot of things are happening just simultaneously. We're hearing a lot about AI, we're hearing about ML, IoT, digitization. I think the pace at which all of it is coming together is quite overwhelming. And I think that's kind of been the fundamental construct in most organizations, where the ambition and the pace and the skills just aren't keeping pace with each other. So everybody's a little bit breathless about this.
Yeah.
And you know, when you can't see something happening right there, it's a little bit tough to appreciate it fully. So there's a little bit of a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
I can see, you know, I'm in the financial services industry. I can see a couple of things that are really changing the space in a very, very big way. You're seeing business models, traditional business models, as well as the new digital models coexist. And they're kind of changing the way how profitability will run for the companies. So it's a lot of stuff happening all together, and just keeping everybody on the toes.
I think you raised an interesting point about the invisibility factor. We just had a conversation with someone who's responsible for digital transformation here in Randstad, and even we talked about how is AI impacting your life. It's kind of hard to put your finger on it. It really is invisible. But you wrote an interesting article recently.
I did.
It'd be great if you could share with the listeners.
So this is the article which was Financial Express, and I talked about 3-2-1 for 2020. What are the 3 things in the workplace that are going to change? What are the 2 things for the workforce that are going to change? And what is the 1 thing that's going to be the strategic imperative for us as leaders in the organization? So let me talk about the 3 changes in the workplace. If you look around, workplaces aren't the way they used to be. We were talking about earlier where there was a really clear segregation of home and a workplace. I think that doesn't exist anymore. And we're putting a lot of thought on creating workplaces that are more brighter, inclusive, leads to better conversations. So there's a lot of thought happening in terms of the way the workplace is getting designed. But I think there are three big trends that will really impact us this year. The first one is social. It's going to be hyper social. So there's just going to be, we've got close to about 400 million WhatsApp users, over 2 billion Facebook and YouTube users. It is pervasive in most individuals' lives right now.
Yeah, and it's impossible to escape.
It's impossible to escape.
Yeah.
But the fact is, companies can't do a thing about it. They haven't been able to leverage that well enough to get something big out of it. So how do you get all of that information that's available out there with a view on the individual, with a view in terms of the marketplace, connected back to the individual, and actually companies can do something about it. So the hyper-social, I think, is going to be a big thing this year. And organizations will really try to figure that one out.
Yeah, interesting. This idea of connectivity, and it's really it's really kind of impressed me here in India how connected people are in India, especially. I mean, the appetite for social media is off the charts here. Certainly, the telecom market has impacted that. I would say data is the cheapest in the world here in India, so therefore the access to content is within reach for just about anybody, regardless of demographic. But the desire to be connected in India is very strong. So we have a choice, as leaders. We can either try to block that or embrace it. And it makes good sense to me, as you said earlier, to embrace it, to bring it into the workplace. I really agree with what you said about, the difference between work and home. So some of us who grew up, let's say in the 70s and 80s, and who have crossed that late 40s, 50 mark, remember the day when, home was home and work was work. And the word comfort was not used in relation to work. Work was a place where you went to perform a task. Not necessarily the most comfortable place, but that wasn't a key priority. But if you think about that in terms of, let's say, when we're building out the work environment now, especially as leaders, HR and beyond, you talk about that kind of the lack of separation now between work and home. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on this?
When new kids join the company, the management training, I spend a fair bit of time just trying to understand how they've been able to make the transition between a campus to the corporate world. And I was talking to this group of about 10 kids, and we were having a very nice conversation when one of them, she says, look, for me, it's like time travel. And I was very intrigued. Time travel, I've never heard this before. So tell me a little bit more. And she said, look, at home, I have the best of computers, I have the best of apps, I have the most comfortable work environment or environment that I have. And then I get in a car and come to work. And it just takes you back 20 years. I've got a computer which looks like a box of sweets. The apps are outdated. I don't get the tools that I need. You're holding me back. Right? I think that's a reality. With 75% of the workforce millennials and later, we've got to actively think about how do you bring that productivity that they're so used to now back into the workspace.
Interesting observation. I was in Chennai yesterday. I was visiting a client down in Chennai, a multinational company, and they were talking about this exact topic, how they were trying to solve this problem. They went to their global team and global digital team, global IT team, and so on. And then some young member of the team on the floor said, I've got something, I can fix that. And this young guy developed an app. It took him 3 days, and he developed an app which solved all their problems, and it made it kind of fun as well. And so the gamification piece comes into the story as well. I think that's another interesting topic, which has come up a lot in my discussions and journeys around India as well. Is how do we make work fun? How do we make the workplace a fun place to be?
On that segue, one of the areas that I was talking about was productivity. If you look at the country today, we aren't the fastest, we may be the fastest growing large economy right now, but there's a lot of stress on profitability and hence a lot of stress on productivity. And I think with the amount of tools that are available right now, we are almost sitting at the cusp of creating very, very significant productivity gains for the organization. You've got AI, you've got ML, you've got tools. I'll give you an example. In the past, you couldn't, you had a workforce going out meeting clients You were giving them data sheets and you were giving them stuff to fill up. Today, you can track their geolocation. You can kind of give them information that's very contextual, and that's a game changer. I think organizations need to kind of embrace it a lot more and be on the other edge of being able to embrace it within the organization.
Interesting thing that I observed, one company that I visited up in Mumbai, actually, we talk about hot desking, plug and play. So in other words, not having an assigned desk. For some companies, this is the norm, particularly if you look at professional services, it becomes more IT services and so on. But this one particular company, which is in more of a conservative manufacturing industry, but this was their back office. They basically had an office where they embraced technology from A to Z and how they work. So when you walk into the office in the morning, you come up to a touch screen and you decide where you're going to sit for the day. So you touch, I'm going to sit at desk number 76, right? And then you reserve the desk and then you walk over and you plug and you play. Now it's interesting because human beings are territorial, so you'll sometimes go to the desk and you'll see a plant on the corner of the desk, a subtle hint that this is actually my desk, but and the company's trying hard to stop that. Family photos and so on. But so you sit down at the desk and you start to play. Now, this company actually took it to the next level. They said, not only that, once a quarter, you can also choose the team that you work with.
Very interesting.
And what they discovered, and this is a very interesting revelation, is that when people walked in, not only to choose their desk, but to choose the team they're going to work with, they're actually choosing people. And so they're choosing the manager. And this is something that's very important, I think, for all of us to realize. And we have data at Randstad, 39 countries, that reaffirms this, that people join people. People work with people and for people. They don't join a brand, they join the person. And they stay because of people, and unfortunately, they leave because of people. So a very innovative thing that's happening in a pretty traditional manufacturing company in their back office. They're saying, hey, let's have quarterly based projects. Let's let people choose which team they're going to work on. Of course, there's outcomes and outputs and KPIs and SLAs and all that around it, but they give the freedom of choice. It's a really interesting way to kind of embrace technology.
It's kind of interesting. We were having this discussion. We were talking about Japan. Which is pretty far from this whole flexible working and with this outbreak of coronavirus, the entire country, most of the people, China, Japan, I know Hong Kong, you're being forced to work from home, and it's kind of going against the grain of many organizations where they're trying to figure this out afresh. So this could be probably a new paradigm out there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I can tell you real stories from Japan, and it's a concern even for us at Randstad. We have quite a large operation in Japan. So this notion of working from home is quite alien for a few reasons. There is the culture of being part of a group, right? And so your workplace is a group, it's a community, and people go to their community every day. So there still is that presenteeism, as they call it, right? Where you come into the office, and even companies that have introduced flex work and flex time and so on, most people don't take advantage of it in Japan because they want to be together with the team physically at the same time. But we've encountered this even at Randstad in Japan. I'm sure many of the people watching, joining the webinar today may have experienced in a country like Japan where when you're saying to people work from home, one, there's the cultural piece, but also there's the infrastructure. Most companies are not prepared and set up for this kind of, let's call it BCP, where people need to have remote access and be able to be productive and work from home. So there's the cultural piece, but there's also the real hard facts of the logistics, the hardware and software.
I couldn't agree with you more. So many years back at the bank where I was, we kind of said, look, this is a big opportunity for us. Let's kind of embrace the flexibility of working from home. And we realized this work from home worked very well in the West. As potentially a Western concept. Countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Hong Kong, the houses weren't equipped. India, where you had smaller houses, joint families, you couldn't create the cocoon. Out here in Chennai, we used to have power issues. For connectivity, and all of this coming together, you want it to be a great concept, which kind of in principle works well, but suddenly the infrastructure just doesn't support you to do that properly.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you a real experience. Again, I was in Chennai on a very important SteerCo meeting with our global colleagues around the world, and it was my moment to present. And as Murphy's Law has it, right when it hit my moment, all the lights went out in Chennai. I think the entire neighborhood was dark for about 15
You
minutes.
overloaded the grid.
I might have.
The concept was so powerful.
4 or 5 times, but it raises a point about agility, and I think when we look at India, there are some just by nature of the market we operate in, the environment we operate in, there is an inherent ability to pivot and to adapt to the environment, and I think that's something that's remarkable about India. And I think a lot of countries don't have it, especially the more evolved economies where the lights don't go out. In India, we're ready for that. And of course, there are things that happen across India. There are things like, again, back to Chennai, things like monsoons and cyclones. And we have, of course, protests and things where you need to be pretty agile. We need to have the ability for people to work remotely. We need to embrace the technology, but also remember that people want that touch. And that's an interesting revelation from a Randstad study that was done. What people really want, why they join companies, and what they really want. What we discovered is that particularly the younger workforce, we'll call them millennials and Gen Zs, but the workforce of the future, we assume that they want to be connected through apps and social media and virtual connection. But actually, they're longing for the touch. They're longing for that face-to-face interaction because they grew up in a world where they didn't have it. And so what we discovered is that people actually want to have a balance between tech and touch. And so I'm curious to hear, your thoughts on this. Talk about digitizing the workplace, but then that, old-fashioned touch piece. What are you seeing?
I'm a big believer that technology can create the touch, which would not have been possible in the past. So at Clix, we're using a bot for engagement, and it's fantastic. I think suddenly or the bot can touch close to about 800,000 people in a month and a half's time, which would have been next to impossible to do from a team perspective. Now what happens is it's reached a level of sophistication where as it's interacting with the person, on the other side, the person actually feels that he's having a real conversation. And many a times you kind of come back and they kind of write messages saying, hey, what great conversation. Can we meet up for coffee after this? Right? And they're talking to a bot out here. And what it does for me, or what it does for my team, is the ability to say, hey, there's a problem out here. There's a group of managers where we are seeing something consistently. Let's address that proactively, which in the past wouldn't have been available. So the tech for touch, or using tech to kind of touch multiple people simultaneously, I think that's a concept that's here.
Oh, and I think it's absolutely relevant in India. When you talk about the volumes in India, I mean, we add zeros to everything we talk about. There's no other country in the world where we talk about the huge volumes, and particularly about the growth of the workforce and the amount of hiring that some companies are doing. But then how do you not only connect, but then engage? And so, I don't think technology replaces that touch. It could be the one that prompts, and even an early warning signal or sign that prompts you to say, hey, we need to engage and really bring some face time with people. So,
what's your view on the gig workers? I think that's a big one right now, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Actually, I just dug up some data. So I'm on the executive board of the India Staffing Federation, which is a board that was really created by the leaders of the larger staffing companies, particularly the temporary staffing companies in India, some multinational companies as well as mainly local companies. And Randstad was a founding member. And one of the things that we've discovered, we look at the flexi workforce, just some quick data for you. If you look at in 2019, according to the India Staffing Federation, there were 4.1 million temporary or flexi workers in India, and that's growing at 23% a year. So by 2021, that's going to go to 6.1 million. It's growing rapidly, and that's in the formal workforce. We're talking about the organized work. If you get into the unorganized, informal workforce,
really don't. There's no numbers there. Right?
No, and of course we don't operate there. Although we're doing our best to bring people into the formal workforce from the informal, but those are massive numbers. Comparatively speaking, that growth rate is faster than anywhere else in the world. Then you add in the gig piece. And this concept of a gig, I think sometimes gets misunderstood. I mean, if you go to the US, for example, and you talk about the gig economy, it typically lends itself to IT professionals that are very curious beings, and they like to work on something short term. They also have a skill set which is marketable, and they sell that skill set to the buyer. Right? So it's a gig, and you could liken it to a band that's playing on stage and playing their gig. And when they finish their 2 or 3 or 4 sets, they move on to the next gig.
You talk about IT professionals. I met a couple of folks that we met. We were trying to hire them in. So it was like a evening networking dinner, trying to smooth them and say, hey, come join the organization. It was a fantastic evening. And I was talking to one person, and he said, I said, you in the last organization, you were there for only a year, 9 months actually. And he looked at me a little surprised, and he said, that's 3 release cycles. That's enough.
Yeah.
He
did his tenure.
And a penny dropped out there saying, okay, he's looking at the world very, very differently from the way I'm looking at it. He's saying, I have kind of delivered 3 product cycles, and I think I've delivered enough. Now it's time for me to do something else out there. And maybe that's where it comes back. But there's a very, very, I'll give a different spin to the gig economy. And I think, and I'll tell you a story. United Airlines it's a very famous airline. It's American. And United Airlines took an individual who had a guitar. And obviously, airlines have secondary folks, not part of the airlines, doing all the baggage handling piece. In this process, he kind of said, look, this is an expensive guitar, please take care of it. And they were indifferent about it. The guitar goes through the luggage, gets broken. He comes out on the other side, and he said, look, you guys broke my guitar. And he was so upset about it, he wrote a song, which is on YouTube. You should Google it, which says United Breaks Guitars. And that song it was 2009, so it was before this huge internet penetration across. It got about, I think, 5 or 9 million hits. The ramification of something like that was it impacted United's stock price by about 10%. They lost $180 million basis that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing here is the worker was likely not part of
United, right?
It was probably outsourced. Hopefully not Randstad, but from an outsourced.
That's a big. I think from an HR perspective, that's a very big challenge. If you've got someone who's wearing your jersey, he's playing for your team.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that he's culturally aligned, knows the message, and it gets tougher with the gig in the gig economy, right? Because this person may be wearing your jersey in the morning and he's wearing somebody else's in the afternoon. How do you align culturally? Because he's your brand ambassador at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think that's a big challenge that we've got to figure out and address.
Absolutely agree. I think when you get to the back end of the business, whether or not it's not customer facing, it's easier to do. Right. But when you start putting gig workers out front. So what I am seeing here in India and even around the world, there is this trend we call workforce planning. Right? So I think any HR professional would look at the organizational development plan and would also come up with a pie chart that would say, hey, we need to have X% of our workforce, our core full-time employees, permanent employees, whereas, although permanent is probably not the word to use anymore, there's no permanence anymore when it comes to employment, but then we have a certain amount that are contractual on specific term contracts, and we have a certain amount that are temp or flexi. And we're seeing more and more leaders, and I say particularly HR leaders, that are thinking more strategically about this to have that balance, but also positioning those members of the workforce in the right place in the organization to be careful of the risk. There was another topic that's really come up a lot everywhere I've gone, and certainly all over the media, and I get asked about it often in media in India, is around skilling. So we have, according to the OECD definition, the workforce, right? So 19 to 59 years old. You can do an active workforce, right? So the 19 to 59 years zone is an apple-to-apples comparison by country, right? India is the fastest growing by far. It's growing by about 1 million people per month. So if you think about that, 19 people turning 19 and coming into the formal workforce, 1 million people per month. So what happens per month? It's almost 13 million per year, okay? And what ends up happening is the average age, of course, comes down too. The average age is 29 now. And only
India's average is 28?
Yeah, it's coming down 28. It was 29 last year. It's already at 28, whereas Japan's 43 and getting older. So you see what's happening. So we have a rapidly growing workforce, a rapidly youthful workforce. It's getting younger and younger. Yet the jobs are not the right jobs. I would say the net job creation we are seeing is there. But they're not the right jobs necessarily for the people that are coming in the workforce. So that's one issue. And so this question of skilling comes up, and upskilling and reskilling. You also have people in the middle of their career that are maybe not ready for this rapid change in technology. And I can tell you, I've been on a learning curve. As a guy who grew up with a typewriter, typing one finger on 10 at a time. So, it raises this question about how all of us, and I would say staffing firms included, but also all of us as leaders, how we tackle this challenge, particularly in the Indian environment, of skilling, upskilling, reskilling.
I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we have. And this is one of those challenges where we have to figure out a way to go beyond the organization. We have to kind of get universities and the government and everybody else also involved. I know government's trying to do a lot on this, but there is a lot that can be done. Because, it's a little bit when the automobiles came, the horse carriages went away, and the people who used to take care of the horses and clean the doo-doo from the roads also went away. New work was created with a very different skill composition, and I think that's going to be a big one, because going forward, half-life of a skill, which is when a technical skill is half as important or half as relevant as when it was, is shrinking. So today, a half-life of a technical skill is about 4 to 5 years, which means you necessarily have an engineer who finishes engineering, and what he learned in the first year of engineering is half as relevant as what he went in. So how do you make sure that as an organization, you're clearly inventorizing the skill set that you have today in the organization, and are able to create that learning agility within the organization, a safe framework for you to kind of build the future? It's a very, very big challenge.
It's a huge issue, but on the other hand, Skill India, Make in India, all of this makes sense to me, but I think it needs to be well organized around the triangle. So if you start, of course, with the companies that are hiring, but also come back to the schooling and the educational system that is educating the workers of the future with the right skill sets and tools for the future. And I think staffing firms can play a role in this as well. We put Randstad alone, well over 60,000 people to work every day here in India across the 4 corners of India. Cumulatively, if you look at the India Staffing Federation members, were well over 1 million workers a day that we're putting out there into employment and gainful employment. So this idea of staffing firms getting involved in skilling is becoming a hotter topic. I can tell you at Randstad, as we celebrate our 60th year this year.
Well,
it's a turning point for us. We are exploring this seriously.
I think even an organization like ours, which is in the financial services space, we're investing heavily. And we are investing heavily in certain skills which will be ubiquitous. It'll go across from sales to your data sciences folks across the organization. But we are also kind of being very thoughtful about, it's going to be almost a 2 operating system model within the organization. You will have a more traditional setup, and within that you will have a newer setup, which is new age skills, different way of operating, more innovative, take greater risks. And I think leadership, it's a leadership challenge. How do you kind of embrace both of it as this transition happens? And this transition is going to have a long tail.
So I discovered something, and I was doing a course at London Business School, I was telling you earlier. It was about transformative leadership, and we talked about this idea of the day after tomorrow. It's no longer about tomorrow, it's about the day after tomorrow, being a leader for the day after tomorrow. And that's where I kind of had this revelation about the changing dynamic of leadership and how we need to become leader as enabler. It used to be that back in the day, at least when we were coming up, the leader knew a lot, and we respected and admired the leader for his or her knowledge and technical skills, hard skills, and so on. But the access to information now is instantaneous. So the days of the leader knowing it all and being admired for what he or she knows are gone, because everyone has access to information. It's less about what you know, and it's more about what you can do to enable people to grow and shine and develop. So this idea of leader as enabler, I think, is really important. How do we enable? Embrace tech and touch.
If you look at it, technical leader, I'm going to call it technical leadership, right? Which was about solving problems, and their experience mattered, and now you're shifting into a more adaptive framework where you're sense making, you're trying to connect the dots, getting people. I agree. That is a big shift.
Good. As I look at the clock, we've got less than 15 minutes to go.
So
we actually got some questions from folks on the webinar. We got a lot of questions, so thank you. Let's take a look. There's some really good ones in here. Thank you. I'm going to start with one actually that I'll throw to you, Aditya. This is from Malika Vyas. I'm saying it right, Malika Vyas, CHRO at Tata Capital. The question is, how can you leverage AI and machine learning in an HR practice, HR professional?
So I think, Malika, it's a fantastic question. I kind of solve it, or I'll kind of answer it in two parts. We have a lot of stuff that's happening in the space of bots. I spoke about the engagement bot. There are talent acquisition has bots. There is a lot of process automation that's happening, and which is going to enable the HR folks to do things which actually add significantly differentiated value. So that's one part of it. I also think if I look at machine learning, you are moving in a stage where we can individualize things like never before. I can go and hire the best type of my sales guy through the machine learning algorithm, and then make sure it's replicated again and again and again. Secondly, you could have learning. We've just got a netcast platform that we've just implemented out here. Fantastic. It can pinpoint at an individual level what are the needs of the learning needs, and then provide that individual those learning needs. And the platform learns from the things that you see, the things that you like. It's very similar to Netflix. So those are two things that can be done. I think the third area is around IoT, and I think it's largely unexplored, or we're just kind of tipping toe in that. Every individual today has a smartphone. It has about 30 odd sensors out there. You know where that person is. How do you make sure that you can provide things that are contextual? And the amount of analytics that can come out of it could be mind-blowing from an HR perspective, and add tremendous value to the business. So I think there's three ways in which you could actually use AI ML in the HR space.
Interesting. One thing we've done here in our company is we realized that people do want the touch when it comes to learning. So we signed an agreement with IIMB, and we launched some programs with them. And these are for our high performers, for our high potentials, and so on. But we do add some qualifiers in there beyond performance and potentials and values, of course. We also look at whether they've completed the online courses that are the prerequisites in order to participate in that face-to-face touch experience. And it's amazing. That becomes an incentive. So people will then participate, engage with the online learning in order then to qualify for that in-person experience, and the completion rate is amazing. So it's maybe one way to kind of blend, technology and touch. Yeah.
I think there's another question which I think I'm going to throw it at you.
Sure.
Paul. It's from Praveen Mahadev, head of HR from Savita Oil Technologies. Can we talk about how organization can sustain growth and profitability in a changing time?
Oh, well, I mean, that's
right up your alley, right?
Every morning when I wake up and come into Randstad India, this is on my mind. Sustainability is a key word for all of us. And I think that there's a few key things around this answer. One is the most successful organizations, the best performing teams, regardless of industry, and so on, you can talk about sports as well, don't focus only on the outcome. In fact, they start with something else, and that's purpose. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about the workforce of the future. We have data to show this, that the workforce of the future, the young up-and-coming workforce, Gen Zs, millennials, they want cause, they want purpose. They're not coming in to talk about EBITDA, productivity, gross profit, and so on, right? And so that should be the outcome of having the right people on the bus with the right culture, the right enabling tools, the right leadership, the right support, the right fun work environment that's challenging, and so on. And then, of course, the outcomes will come. And so we talk about sustainability. I do believe that it's more about getting these things right. And when you get these things right, then sustainable results will follow. And we've seen that here in our own company, here in India and beyond. So we don't start conversations with the output. We finish the conversation with the output. And I think that's a very different paradigm. You move those financial slides to the end of the conversation, and you start to create a culture. And I think that's, for me, as a leader, that's one important thing. I think the other thing is, how do you create sustained growth? Well, it's about setting clear goals, which are not about size, which are more about quality and purpose and so on. And over time, when you look away and you come back, you'll notice that you've probably grown pretty significantly when you focus on cause and purpose and long-term vision.
One of our founders of the company says this often, saying, the numbers you'll forget in 3 days.
Yeah.
Or maybe a month.
Yeah.
the culture and the way the people felt in the organization will last forever. So on that note.
Yeah, right. Agreed. So another one for you, Aditya. This is from Prabhu Ramachandran. He's the CEO of Facidio Technology Solutions Private Limited. Beyond pay, what are the aspects that help to keep the new gen workforce motivated and aligned towards the company's vision? So other than money, what keeps them engaged?
You know, it was funny. I was a title before Clix, and we tried to kind of get in touch to say, what does the IT professional, the digital professional really want? And you know, we assumed that the most important thing was money, and we were wrong. It was the fourth most important thing. So there were three things that they thought were significantly more important than money. One was they wanted phenomenal work. The quality of work was very, very important. They wanted a work environment which was differentiated, which they could feel very comfortable with. They were looking at a brand, and the point that you made, purpose. You know, we've had folks who come back saying, "Look, you solved the connectivity problem. What's the big problem that you're trying to solve for now?" And that purpose is a really important motivator for this growth. So as an organization, Prabhu, if you are able to kind of build a brand, connect to a larger purpose for the organization, and give them outstanding work, yeah, they're going to stay.
Well, we also have evidence that that people will stay in a company for less money than moving across the street for more money if they connect with the cause. And so I would add another piece, which is the voice. You know, the feeling that they're making an impact, that they're heard, that they have a say in the future of the company, in the direction, that they're given challenges. You know, in the old days, you sort of worked your way up the totem pole, and it took time, and you kept your head down, you worked hard, and eventually you would earn a seat at the table, right? But what the newer generation is looking for is a chance to prove themselves, a chance to try something. So we even talked about this earlier, but when you throw someone into the fire with support, they often will amaze us. So I think, you know, when you talk about the newer, younger workforce of the future, it's about challenging them, but with a safety net, with support, with encouragement. They're also looking for coaching. So back to your point about why people join, why they stay, and so on. Money is not the number one factor. And again, we have lots of data. We're happy to share that with you. We've done the data across 39 countries. In India, it's not number one. In fact, the number one reason that people join companies, it's not stability of the company, it's not the financial stability, it's not the brand, it's the leader they're going to join. And I found that to be a very interesting discovery. It's actually an anomaly that appeared especially in India. That people in India, when they're looking for a job, they really relate to the person they're going to be working for or working with. They join people. So back to my point about leader as enabler, providing opportunities to learn and grow, and certainly learning and development is also a hot button in India. Yeah.
So you're basically saying talent magnets. These guys become talent magnets within the organization to get the best guys in and then let them stay in.
The companies that are getting it right, and again, not only in India and beyond, are the companies that put a strategy around talent attraction, not focused on necessarily on the brand itself, but on the people behind the brand. And so you'll look at career websites, for example, the companies that are really doing well in attracting and retaining the best talent. The career website is all about the people. Yeah. It's all about the leaders, and it's leader as human. So it's not just about the leader in the workplace. You'll see shots of the leader, what they do on their days off, for example. You know, leader as a whole person. That's what people are attracted to. Of course, you need to have a cause. You need to have a compelling vision and strategy for the company. But certainly, if you have leaders that are not afraid to show who they are as people, you're going to attract better talent.
Great.
So we have a little bit of time, actually, and there's a couple more questions. What do you say? There's one here. Well, in the future of work, HR, the role of HR. This is an interesting question. It comes up off and off now. HR is constantly evolved and transformed and changed, and even the word HR is kind of has taken on different forms and shapes. Right. But how can HR drive the organizational culture to enable that true merging of human capability and technology for a productive workplace? This is from Sanjanya Vaidya, the AVP and COE head, HR talent processes and D&I.
Man, Sanjanya, it's a fantastic question. It's also a very difficult question to answer, right? Yeah. I think culture is core, and I had a very nice definition of culture, which was how people behave when no one's watching.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, "How do I assess culture? Give the team a tough problem, and see how they solve it. Now, I think there are 2 or 3 big things as this digitization piece is going to get bigger in an organization. Cultures are going to get, old cultures are going to drop away, new cultures are going to get emanate, and you can do a lot in terms of molding the culture. Making sure that you're getting the right people within the organization who not only own but role play that culture within the organization. So that's a great point in terms of when you get somebody in. But I think a large part of it is also creating an environment which is safe enough for people to learn. Creating an environment where folks can fail and still kind of survive for the next day. That as a skill set within an organization. So learning agility or ability to kind of create an environment where people can learn, as well as creating a safe environment, becomes a big element of helping the organization transition into digital.
I just was thinking about one of my favorite books, Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's up on my shelf.
I can see it.
I see it right on my shelf in my room. And it's traveled with me all over the world wherever I go, and I use it as kind of my, it guides me in a way, my North Star, I guess. And he talks about companies that went from good to great, and central to that is not the return to stakeholders. That's the proof of concept, right? The measurement, the metric is the return to stakeholders, of course, and shareholders. But it's really about culture. And he talked about how the leaders of the good to great companies, and I'm just talking about, not only talking about the CEOs, we're talking about the entire leadership team. They bought into this idea that it's all about culture. And when you define your culture and you have an ambition around your culture and you protect it at all costs, then results will follow because you attract a certain kind of person that matches with your culture. We've all been there. We've had people that didn't match with our culture, and then they became stoppers, and sometimes became poison in the organization. So, I think the companies that get it right, the organizations that get it right, spend a lot of time talking as a leadership team, and not only HR, because this is where I think a lot of companies go wrong. They hand over culture to HR.
It's the most important thing.
And they say, HR, you define the culture, you make sure you are the protectors of our culture. It's not about HR, it's about the entire leadership team, and of course, right down to the very front line. So culture is something it's hard to put your finger on and touch and so on, but it is really the most crucial piece of, back to the story about sustainability. To really go from good to great, you need to define the culture and then protect it at all costs.
I think as you kind of build that culture within the organization, organizations need to start creating almost rituals and artifacts around it. So you may have a ritual which is followed again and again, and after a point, it becomes a part of the organization. And these are very important. Cultural artifacts, are things that kind of align people back into the way of operating when they don't know how to operate. So it's tough, and it's a pan-organization responsibility. So HR can play a catalyst role, but it's really the leadership.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The artifacts, and also let's call them mantras, guiding principles.
Yeah.
We have one that we created for Randstad India, which is honor the past and focus on the future. It's important not to forget the past. Certainly don't erase it, but then also not dwell on the past. And a lot of our participants today in the webinar are working for companies that have been around a long time. And it's easy to fall into the legacy mode. We've always done it like that, therefore we must continue to do it like that. But I think it's important to value the past but focus on the future. That's one example of creating a culture, and then encourage people to do it, and also recognize and reward people who do it. So hey, it's time to wrap up. But before we do that, just some final thoughts on HR as a profession, the future of India, any kind of under this theme of Randstad Leader Connect. What are your thoughts on where we're going?
So I think it's the best time to be in the HR profession right now. I think the amount of action that's going on around is amazing. There's digital, there is technology, there are new processes coming in. You've got new work types. I talk about this virtual employee. So, today you have real employees. Tomorrow you have employees who are robots, who are bots, who have a personality. You give them an objective, you invest in them, you get them to deliver outcomes and manage it in that manner. So there is just so much happening out there. So I think the future is a very bright one. Skill sets are going to evolve, and as the workforce and the workplace evolve, I think the HR professional needs to evolve along with it.
It's a great time to be an HR professional, but certainly some of the most agile people in the organization are from HR. Think about how many times the definition of HR has changed through our careers.
Yeah.
And also be renamed and redefined and so on. So again, this is our very first of a series of webinars.
I hope we did a
on
good
a
job.
topic. Well, thank you. We're going to hear from our participants today. I'm very keen to hear your feedback. Obviously, it's our first time, but we will continue to do this. Again, this is based on your input and your requests that we're here today. And I think the name of this keyword is connect. It's about connect. It's about Leader Connect. And we're trying to use technology to touch. We've had lots of roundtables around the country, and many of you have joined us in person. Thank you for your participation, active participation. We want to extend that now into a virtual environment, but continue doing our face-to-face roundtable. We'll continue to do that around the country. It's very important that we sit together as professionals, share ideas, because we know that we're all smarter together, right? None of us individually is smarter than all of us together, and we can learn from each other. So having said that, this is just the beginning. We have another webinar booked and ready to go. Stay tuned for the next one, which will actually be on leveling the leadership playing field for women. It's a very hot topic. We talk about leadership, participation rate of women in the workforce, but also at the leadership level and senior leadership level. We'll be joined by Nishat Usmani. She's a director of KPMG India. We'll have an inside out as well as an outside in perspective. And it's also a topic that's very close to my heart now that 50% of my leadership team here in India are women, very capable women. And we're keen to empower women and bring more and more women into the workforce as Randstad. So again, Aditya, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone at Randstad, of course, but also everyone who's here today for being the pioneer and stepping up and joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To all of you who have sat through the webinar today, I hope you've enjoyed it, the conversation we've had. I know I have with Aditya. I'm sure we're going to continue when we go offline in a moment. But of course, we'd like your feedback. There's an opportunity to do that. We'll be coming to you soon with a mailer on that. And of course, our LinkedIn group is there as well. So please join. There'll be more and more content as we move forward. Again, thank you for joining us and wish you all the best on this beautiful sunny day in Bangalore.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.